Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel Leadership as Performance. Happy Labor Day if you are in the United States. Because it's Labor Day, I wanted to talk about the leadership in a community that works very hard in this country, and that of course is the Latino community. So today's question is, what makes Latino leadership so special? According to a study from UCLA, if Latinos in the United States were a country, they would be the fifth largest country in the world in terms of GDP. They would be ahead of India, for example. This is incredible. This shows how much this community works and how much this community brings to this country. Now, to analyze the leadership style of the Latino community, we're going to use three dimensions. Dimension number one is communication, how communication is done among Latinos. Dimension number two is relationships, how relationships work. And dimension number three is the conception of time, how time is conceived by Latinos. One, communication. Communication among Latinos in the United States is much more indirect than communication in the general population in the US. It aligns more with communication in Latin American countries that tends to be indirect. Now, what does that mean? That means that, for example, if somebody wants a day off and they're talking to their boss, they might not say directly, I want a day off. They might say, hey, on Monday, I need to go to the doctor and my mother is sick, so I need to make sure I'm there, without specifically asking for the day off. That is characteristic of what we call high context cultures, in which you are expected to read the message in the context versus the words, because the power distance, the formality that exists between different levels of society in Latin countries, it's much higher than in the United States. People tend to be more indirect. Number two, relationships. Relationships are extremely important in Latin America in general, and of course among Latinos in the United States in particular. You need to build relationships if you want to gain trust. And of course, in order to lead people, in order to do business in a particular country or among a particular group of people in a country, you need to have that trust. And that trust is built mainly through relationships. This is in contrast to cultures in which tasks are the main thing. For example, in the United States, a business relationship doesn't really require for the relationship, the actual personal relationship, to be developed over time for people to trust you. They trust you because you are in business, you're in that industry, you have a title, and they will go immediately to the task. Whereas in Latin America and among Latinos in the United States, the relationship is much more important. This also ties to cultures that are much more collective, so their mindset is more about other people, versus cultures that are more individualistic, and the mindset is about the individual first. Time among Latinos in the United States and among Latin Americans in general is much more flexible. The conception of time is much more flexible than it is in countries in which time is what we call monochronic. So the actual distinction is monochronic versus polychronic. Latinos have more of a polychronic conception of time, versus, let's say, Anglo-Americans here in the United States have more of a monochronic conception of time. Monochronic is that we go one thing at a time in a sequential order in time. For example, in a meeting, we have an agenda and we first go to point one, then point two, then point three, etc. Whereas in a polychronic culture, it doesn't matter. You can go to point one and then to point five and then back to point four. It's much more flexible when it comes to time. And of course, that also applies to being on time. In Latin America, it's common if there is a party for people to arrive at different times, right? Even an hour, 2 hours before the beginning of the party. Whereas here in the United States, it's much more fixed. The conception of time is much more rigid. Latinos are the backbone of American economy. If you go to any city in this country, you go to New York, you go to Los Angeles, you go to Chicago, and you take the subway in the morning at 6 a.m. in the morning and you look around, you'll see a lot of minorities, and a lot of them are Latinos. These are hardworking people that go to work very early. As we saw in the study from UCLA, if we were a country, we would be the 5th largest country in the world in terms of GDP. You find us everywhere. You find us in boardrooms, and you find us in hospitals. You find us in the arts and also in education, like myself. So there are 3 things that I would like you to remember when it comes to Latino leadership and working with Latinos. 1, communication is indirect. 2, we are relationship-oriented people. And 3, time is much more flexible for us. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful Labor Day. Please subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye.